All right. Okay, we're recording. So, good evening again. And the title of tonight's class is the meaning of the new year and the new year of meaning. Now, let me just take a step back from the title for a minute before we, we'll do that at the end, like bring it all together. But let's first look at the way things are usually done. How do we usually, when we come to the end of a financial year, fiscal year, or we come to the end of a project and so on and so forth, what's the usual way of operating? Well, the usual way of operating is to look back over the course of the project or the course of the year, the fiscal year, or the course of whatever it is that we happen to be talking about, the trip or the whatever. Look back over all the details and so on and so forth, and then express an opinion, and then sort of plan ahead for the next, the next trip, the next year, the next fiscal year, and so on and so forth. That is definitely the usual way of doing things. Interestingly enough, it's not the Kabbalistic way of doing things. You see, for those of you who are familiar with the Jewish New Year prayers, there's a special set of prayers for the New Year. We basically don't look back at the past at all. We don't look back at the past. But what we do is what's called in Kabbalah, binyan haMalchut. Let me just share a screen over here so you can understand what I'm talking about. And as everybody knows, the 10 Sfirot are Keter, Chochmat, Bina. We count Da'at when we don't count Keter. So if we're counting Keter, we don't count Da'at. Da'at is an immanent Sfira, and Keter is a transcendent Sfira. So when we count the transcendent Sfira of Keter, we won't count the immanent Sfira of Da'at. When we don't count Keter, then we do count Da'at. So in any event, Keter, Chochmat, Bina, there's Da'at, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and the final Sfira is the Sfira of Malchut. The final Sfira is Malchut. So says the Kabbalah, what we are doing and why the prayers are extended. The prayers are pretty long on Rosh Hashanah, on the day of the Jewish New Year. It's actually 2 days, and there are a tremendous amount of prayers that go into it. And Kabbalah explains the reason for that is because we are building Malchut. It's called binyan haMalchut. Now, what does that actually mean? So let's just first look at the concept of Malchut as it is in the nefesh, in the soul of a person, because it was a basic principle of the Baal Shem Tov that, and in fact he based a tremendous amount of his analysis on this idea that mi basari echezeh Elokah, from my flesh I see God. In other words, from looking at myself, how I'm built physically, that's how I can understand godliness. So therefore, when we want to understand what is Malchut and what's binyan, the building, the construction or reconstruction of Malchut, what do we mean by that? And what we mean is, by looking at the quality of Malchut in the soul, in the powers of the soul, we'll be able to understand what it means in a more objective sense. So what does Malchut correspond to? Malchut corresponds to the power of action and the power of speech. In the introduction to the Tikkunei Zohar, which is a very, very famous, it's a famous piece, the introduction to the Zohar, to the Tikkunei Zohar, which is called Patach Eliyahu. Elijah began his discourse. Now, this is something that, at least amongst Hasidim, those who followers of the Baal Shem Tov, they say this every evening going into the Sabbath. The evening going into the Sabbath, we cite this particular introduction, which is actually a teaching. It's one of the secret teachings that was imparted to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, by Eliyahu, by the prophet Elijah. Now, the prophet Elijah already passed away many 1,000 years before, more than 1,000 years before the time of the Baal Shem Tov. Almost 2,000 years, 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years before the time of the Baal Shem Tov. But the idea is that the prophets, although they pass on, they pass into the world of truth. In other words, they're no longer in this world, but it doesn't mean to say they don't communicate with people in this world, and they do communicate, even to the extent that sometimes Elijah, the prophet, actually can come in the flesh, apparently, to rescue people from a certain situation, physical rescue from certain situations. There are many stories. I don't want to go into them now because we're going to get off the subject. But perhaps one day we'll tell some of the stories that of visitations by Elijah the prophet. In any event, Elijah the prophet is one of the masters of the secret keys, or to put it slightly differently, one of the masters of the keys to the secrets. The two prophets who imparted and continue to impart till this day secrets of the Torah, in other words, the Kabbalistic insights, were Elijah the prophet and his teacher, Achia HaShiloni. Achia HaShiloni, according to most accounts, was the teacher of Elijah, of Eliyahu. Others say that he was the student. Some say he was the student of Elijah, but it seems that the more common opinion is that he was the teacher of Elijah. Both of them are called masters of the keys, masters of the secret keys, or masters of the keys to the secrets. Elijah the prophet was one who imparted many of the teachings in the Zohar to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and to the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, who lived in the 1500s. He imparted many of the secrets of Kabbalah, even deeper secrets of Kabbalah, to the Arizal, to Rabbi Yitzhak Luria. The teacher of the Baal Shem Tov was in fact Achia HaShiloni. Okay, so it says in Patach Eliyahu, in the section that Elijah taught Rabbi Shimon and came to be part of the Zohar, the introduction to the Tikkunei Zohar. So it says over there that the Sphira of Malchut is called Malchut Peh. Malchut is the mouth. Malchut is the mouth. The power, in other words, Malchut is the power of speech. It's primarily the power of speech. It's also the concept of action, but primarily in terms of communication, it's the power of speech. In other words, the power of action is more of an individual thing. The power of speech is more of a communication thing. So the power of speech is what Malchut is all about. And when we talk about Tikkun haMalchut, rectifying Malchut, the whole concept of Tikkun is a very important concept in Kabbalah in general. So the whole concept of Tikkun of Malchut is to metaken, to rectify one's speech. Now, in a very simple sense, rectifying speech simply means not using profane language, profanities, speaking the truth, not speaking bad or speaking ill of other people or situations or anything like that. In other words, keeping your language clean and pure. That's that's a simple, straightforward concept of the Tikkun Malchut. But another aspect of the Tikkun Malchut, and the most important aspect probably of Tikkun Malchut, is the idea of building up Malchut. It's not just preventing it from doing the wrong thing, but to build it up. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean, building up Malchut? So Malchut, the way it's explained in Kabbalah, Malchut, as we can see from the diagram, Malchut is the last of the Sfirot, And the way it is emanated sort of as an independent, even though it's emanated from the Sphira above it, it's nevertheless, there's a sort of a break between Malchut and the Sphirot above it. There's a sort of a break, right? How is it so that there is a break? Because this section over here of the Sphirot comprises what is called a partzuf. What does a partzuf mean? A partzuf means a structure. Literally, it means a visage or a face, but it's not meant to be taken in that literally, in that sense. The six Sphirot, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, comprise what is called a partzuf of Zeir Anpin, the small face, the small partzuf, the small visage. In other words, the cluster of Sphirot, that's the main structure of every world. It's called the small face, or the small interface would probably be a better term for it. It's called the small interface because there's an aspect of Keter, Arich Anpin, which is called the large visage, or the large face, so to speak. Arich Anpin, or the long face, sometimes it's called. Why? Long because it reaches down as well as reaching up. So it's much longer, but nevertheless, the compact sphere, a cluster of Sphirot from Chesed to Yesod is called Zeir Anpin. And Zeir Anpin is it's the primary structure and being of every world. A world is a plane of reality. There's 5 different planes of reality. The lowest plane of reality is called the world of Asiya, the world of action. And then there's the world of Ruach. The world of Yetzirah, which is corresponds to the world of formation. And then the world of Bria, the world of creation, coming into being. The world of Atzilut, the world of emanation, and the world that's called Adam Kadmon, the world that's a reflection of the divine, Adam Kadmon. Okay, so the main structure of every world, because the inner structure of every world is the same 10 Sphirot. You have the same 10 Sphirot repeated throughout all of the worlds except Adam Kadmon. But Atzilut, Bria, Yitzirah, Asiya has the same structure of 10 Sphirot, and the bulk of the structure of that particular world is through this partzuf over here, the partzuf of Zeir Anpin, comprising these 6 Sphirot. Now, Zeir Anpin is the underlying theoretical structure. Let's call it the algorithm of a particular world. But the practical outer structure, or what you might want to call the vessel into which the algorithm is fed, I don't want to call it a computer because that'll, but the machine, let's call it, okay, into which the algorithm is fed, that is the Sphira of Malchut. Malchut is the practical. Malchut is generally called the vessel, the kli, the vessel into which all the other Sphirot pour their light. Malchut is also sometimes called, let me just get the chat box up in case someone's asking questions. And I don't see the chat. 1 second. No one's asking questions yet. Okay, good. So Malchut is called the sea. Malchut is called the sea because it has that sort of function. It's this large vessel, so to speak, into which all the lights of all the Sphirot above generally pour. The problem is that there's a very narrow channel between the upper Sphirot, all the upper Sphirot, that's the whole gamut of the upper Sphirot, all this entire gamut of Sphirot. There's a very thin channel between them and Malchut. And down that channel comes all the light. And the problem is that it takes Malchut a long time to fill up, so to speak. It takes it a long time to fill up. And not only does it take it a long time to fill up, but there could be all kinds of blockages and all kinds of obstacles to Malchut filling up. The channel could be blocked, the channel could be broken. It could be being misdirected into other things, and so on and so forth. So the whole concept, therefore, of binyan haMalchut, building up Malchut, is critical for the flow to work, for the algorithm to work in the machine, for the algorithm to run the whole system effectively and properly for the benefit of that particular world, for the benefit primarily of Malchut. You could look at it like this, if you want to look at it by way of an analogy, that Malchut would be the body, and the Sfirot would be all of the powers of the soul that are expressed through the body. Now, when the powers of the soul express themselves fully through the body, then the person is in a state of, essentially in a state of enlightenment. It's a state of being fully in tune with one's inner powers, with one's divine powers with which the soul is invested. But when the algorithm doesn't run properly in the body, in other words, when the various powers don't pour their energy and the light into Malchut in the proper way, then things have to be fixed. So the question is, how do you fix things? How do you build up Malchut? How do you build up Malchut that is ready to receive what's called the hashpa'ah, the flow, the outflow, the outpouring of light and energy from the upper Sfirot into Malchut? How is Malchut going to be ready? How does Malchut get prepared? Well, we have to build Malchut. We have to make sure that it is properly structured in order for that to happen. That's the concept of what the Jewish New Year is all about. It's building Malchut. Yael asks, please give an example of a blockage between Yesod and Malchut. Let's talk about it in human terms, because that's the way that we can understand it best. Again, that's the way that the Baal Shem Tov always understood things. Mi b'sari echazeh Eloka. From my flesh I see God. In other words, from the way I'm structured, that's how I understand godliness. All right, so let's look at it. Let's understand it in that particular way. The Sfirot are initially the partzuf of Zeir Anpin. Is initially, this is what it states in Genesis. In Genesis, when it talks about the creation of man, initially it says, Zachar unekeva bara oisai, right? Male and female, he created them. He created them, male and female, but as one structure. It was male and female together as one single structure. Then came what is called the Nesira, the separation of the two partzufim into the partzuf of Zeir Anpin and the partzuf of Nukva, which is Malchut, the male and the female elements. They have to be separated so that now they can turn around and unite face to face. They can commune with each other face to face and not back to back, because when they were joined, so to speak, like Siamese twins, back to back. That separation is not a negative thing. It's a necessity for them to be able to turn around face to face and therefore have proper and full communion. Now, what can happen is that because of life's circumstances, which is to say, we always blame our shortcomings on life's circumstances. So Zeir Anpin and Malchut would base their lack of proper face-to-face communication, would base it on life circumstances. The short exclamation point for that would be BS. It's not life circumstances, that's choices that people make. In other words, if there's no proper communication between Zeir Anpin and Malchut, between, in one of the analogies, husband and wife, Adam and Eve, male and female elements within the person himself, if there's no proper face-to-face communication between them, that's because of the choices that a person makes or made. And those can be restructured. So the whole point of Rosh Hashanah, again, a blockage between Yesod and Malchut is when they're not facing each other. They're not talking to each other, but they're talking at each other. They're talking past each other. They're talking completely different subjects and they're not communicating. That would be an example of a blockage. All right, Ben asked, the Sfirot of Zampan need to be equally balanced in Malchut to real enlightenment. I'm not sure what you mean by equally balanced. All of the Sfirot are, all of the upper Sfirot, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, pour their light into Yesod, and Yesod is the one that does the balancing. Yesod is called, usually is translated in English as foundation. The foundation is the most important part of the building, because otherwise, if the foundation is not strong, the whole building will collapse. So the Yesod is what has to do the balancing, right? The Yesod is where the balancing happens. And there's ways in which the balancing happens. It has to be done. I mean, there's the ways in which the communication happens. Once Yesod is in itself balanced, in other words, once it finds its foundational structure and its purpose in life, so to speak, then it can communicate with Malchut. But the way Yesod and Malchut communicate has to be what's called, according to, in Kabbalistic terminology, it's a term that's used in the vision of Ezekiel, and it's also used in the Sefer Yetzirah and various other places. It's called Ratzov V'Shov, running and returning. In other words, there can't be a constant pouring of energy into Malchut. There has to be a pouring and then a withdrawal, and a pouring and a withdrawal. Just as you would have, for example, when a mother is feeding her baby, she feeds the baby until the baby's full, and then she pulls back. And then you can't let the baby become over full and then throw up. That's not going to do anyone any good. So it has to be balanced. It has to be structured, and Ratzor v'Shov. Actually, there's two aspects of Ratzor v'Shov. I don't want to go into too deeply right now. But there's Ratzor and Shov of the Kli of the vessel, and there's Ratzor and Shov of the light. The Ratzor and Shov of the light actually has a different name. It's called Moti v'lo Moti. Moti means touching and withdrawing. Touching and withdrawing, touching and withdrawing. And it starts with touching, with coming down to the recipient, and then withdrawing, coming down and withdrawing. Right? Whereas the vessel, Malchut, is in a state of Ratzor, reaching up in order to get the light, and then coming back down again and and absorbing it and growing from it. Okay, so yes, exactly. That is 100% true. Yeah, running and returning. That's right. Running and returning. Exactly. That's the terminology that's used. Ratzov v'Shov. Running and returning. The angels are running and returning in the Merkava. And in Kabbalah speaks about the opposite when the light is coming down. It's called Moti v'lo Moti, touching and not touching. Okay, so to get back to Earth, to get back to Earth, what we were talking about essentially was the idea of the building of Malchut. How does the building of Malchut come about? The building of Malchut comes about by nourishing it. It's not so much by preventing it from getting involved in negative things. That's also true. Yeah, one has to improve one's speech and so on and so forth. No question about it, because we said the Malchut is peh, it's speech. But not only do you have to prevent Malchut from doing negative things, but even more important, and perhaps at this time of the year, the most important thing, is building up Malchut. In other words, giving Malchut the vision of where it ought to be. That's what's called building Malchut. Giving Malchut a vision of what it means to be united with a higher level of being. That is the entire idea of Rosh Hashanah, of the Jewish New Year, and that's why we don't look back when we're on the day of the 2 days of the Jewish New Year. The whole concept there is the binyan Malchut, looking forward to the future. It's a forward-looking thing, not a backward-looking thing. Backward-looking thing is the whole month preceding Rosh Hashanah, the month of Elul. then it's a time to look back and see what you did wrong and so on and so forth, and try to rectify that and see where things were getting blocked or going haywire and so on. But the time for building begins on Rosh Hashanah. In other words, the looking forward to the year ahead of us is to structure it, to imagine the way it could be in its best possible form. Will it reach that? We don't know 100% that it'll reach it, but there's every good chance that it will reach it if you at least plan for it. And there's a very good chance that you'll never reach it if you don't plan for it. It's not going to happen generally by itself, because things go according to, in the general direction of the plan that you made. Why is that so? Because the plan, to get back to our diagram of the Sfirot, the plans are really up here. Oops. The plans are in Keter. That's where the whole focus upwards has to be. The focus at the top of the structure is where in other words, the transcendent aspect of the Sfirot is where it has the transcendent aspect, because transcendent is also transformative. The transformation essentially happens in Keter. When everything is in a state of Ratzor upwards in Keter, then when it comes down again, it can come down as a different thing. It can come down, a person can come down, so to speak, as a different person. When a person goes up to a place where all identity is lost, because Keter is called ayin, nothingness. Keter is nothingness. And when Malchut and everything else goes up towards Keter and gets lost completely in Keter, then when it comes back, it can take on a completely new form, starting off with how it becomes innovatively structured in Chokhmah. Right? Chokhmah is the concept of innovation. It's a whole new way of looking at things, coming out of nothingness. It's the innovation aspect. Then comes Bina, which is building, and so on and so forth. And then the structure is actually in Chesed. Okay, a question. When Malchut is full, where does she empty her contents? Isn't she right now under Keter, not under, meant above? She's not, well, Yael, you're right to a certain extent that in the structure of the worlds, the Malchut of the higher world becomes the Keter. In other words, the lowest aspect of the higher world becomes the Keter of the lower world. So if we're talking about, let's say, the world of Atzilut, the Malchut of Atzilut becomes the Keter of Bria. The Malchut of Bria becomes the Keter of Yetzirah. The Malchut of Yetzirah becomes the Keter of Asiyah. Okay, so when Malchut is full, she doesn't empty her contents. The fullness of Malchut is when she is united completely with Zer Anpin, when they're united completely as one unit, and then they ascend to a higher level. Together they ascend to a higher level. Zer Anpin can't really do it on his own, and Malchut cannot do it on her own. They need to be together to ascend to a higher level. And that is what the New Year is all about. The New Year, therefore, the meaning of New Year is that one begins to build the binyan haMalchut. That's what it's called in Kabbalah, the building of Malchut. It's not looking back; it's looking forward, and it's structuring things in the way that it's let's call it planning for the future. In other words, the blueprint is not filled out in all of its details. It's a blueprint. It's a general direction and a general idea of where it is that we want to get to, what it is that we want to achieve. What is the year going to look like? I mentioned before that the year is going to be, this coming year is going to be a year. It's going to be an amazing year. There's no question about it. In fact, someone found and pointed out to me that the Lubavitcher Rebbe said like 30 years ago in the Hebrew calendar, Tafshin Nun Aleph, he was speaking about the year of Tafshin Pei Aleph, which is this year, and he called it the year of Plaot Arenu. Plaot Arenu, I will see miraculous things. This year we will see miraculous things. In other words, we're going to see Plaot. Plaot are miracles. Yeah? Plaot Arenu. It's going to be a year of miraculous events. Now, how those will exactly turn out, we don't know, but the idea of miracle is we don't really know where it comes from. In other words, it's if it would be scientifically based and scientifically analyzable, a new phase, yeah, definitely a new phase. If it would be scientifically predictable, then it would be just a natural event. This is going to be a supernatural. I think it's going to be a number of supernatural events. Now, supernatural events have a habit of dressing up in natural clothing so that we might just think they're natural events and natural consequences of previous things. But the way to understand when a thing is sort of miraculous is, could it have been predicted? If it could not have been predicted as such, then unlikely that it's a natural outcome of things that happened before, because you can always predict like a step or two ahead, but you can't predict something that's way beyond what you could have possibly predicted, way beyond what you could have expected. And I think that this year is going to be that. So therefore, consequently, our general picture of what it is that it's going to be a time of transcendence, miraculous events, self-transcendence, a time of, let's call it completely new beginnings that are not even necessarily related to what happened before. Now, how's this going to turn out for each individual in particular? We'll see. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Whether COVID had something to do with this, I would suspect that it does. Terry said, "I'm sorry. Let me go back a little bit. In this week, I had surgery. I need help. Anyone could say a prayer. Say a prayer for me. Absolutely, Terry. Why don't you just send me some details? You have my email, and definitely I will keep you in my prayers. I think I probably have your name in a list. I have to remember where I put the list. Send me your name and your name and your mother's name. If you have Hebrew name, that'll be and your mother's Hebrew name. She had one. That's the best way to do it, and then I will keep you in your prayers for sure. Okay, so is COVID a preparation for the new beginning? You know, it's hard to say. Some people really suffered, but unfortunately, the way it always happens is that there's always, darkness before the light. The darkness before dawn is the worst darkness, the most profound darkness, the suffering before the relief is, as in the Exodus from Egypt, Vaya'anchu ha'am, they groaned from the pressure and from the slavery and from the suffering that they went through, and then immediately afterwards was the redemption. Yeah, there you go, exactly. The cleansing that occurred in Egypt before the advent of the Torah, exactly, right, 100%. And that's so. It could be that that's what it is. Some kind of very negative event. I mean, look, let's not make light of it. Unfortunately, there were people who got very sick. There were people who died. I have a very good friend who almost died. He lives just a couple blocks away from me. And people did suffer. There's no question about it. But we always got to look on the good side of things. Yes, it could be that a certain cleansing, and it could be that the care that we express for others when they are in a state of illness, or when they're just devastated by loneliness and seclusion and so on and so forth, reaching out to others. extending a helping hand, as I spoke about in that lecture on the meaning of the year that we're now in. You know, sending out a helping hand, paying your debts on time, kind of thing. In other words, don't leave it till later. Repay people now, even if you don't owe them. And you know, that changes the world. That changes everything. And that's what the building is all about. That's the whole concept of building Malchut, is that it's communication without expectation that you're actually replying to a previous question. You're initiating the communication. And that initiating the communication is what really builds up Malchut in the best possible way. Yes, responding to previous issues, previous questions, previous whatever is an important thing, but it's not all that there is to it. Initiating communication is definitely a quality of Malchut that is transformative. The world was never the same after the Torah was given. Matan Torah, everyone was affected, Jew and non-Jew, everybody. Yeah, that's true. That was a different world. Became a different world. Yes. Okay, let's leave it at that. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer. Any questions? Okay, Ernest, how are you? I haven't spoken to you for a while. You're very welcome. Good, folks. Okay, doesn't look like, yeah, thank you very much. Fast coming up on Monday. It's the slow fast, as they call it, yeah. It's the fast that Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the day when we rectify everything and everything is turned around. Yes, it's on YouTube. I think it's called the year 5781. Let me look quickly. I'll just check out if I can see it quickly on YouTube, and I'll give you a link to it. First, I have to get into YouTube. 1 second. My channel. Here we go. Let me share a screen here so you can see where my channel is. Just called, my YouTube channel is called Kabbalah Decoded. You can find it there. Yeah, some insights into 5781. That's the one. This one over here. Some insights into 5781. Here you are. I will now drop the link right here, and there you are. Eat food of the angels on Yom Kippur, yeah. Perry Stone. Not sure what that's about, but all right. Okay, folks. There we are. That's it. Okay. Have a good one. And I think that next Thursday, there will not, no, next Thursday and the one after, for 2 weeks, there won't be a class because I will be traveling next Thursday. And the Thursday after that is going to be Sukkot, the festival of Sukkot. So, but the one after that. So there won't be any class for 2 weeks. But I may record a class before I leave and just drop it onto YouTube. So we'll see. All right, Carl. Thank you. Okay, all the best, everybody. Have a great year. And I expect to hear the miracles that happen to you all at some point in time. We have to talk about it. Very good.